What a great turnout. Okay, welcome everyone to Stitched. I'm Lise Funderburg and I teach nonfiction writing here at Penn. I'm glad we can all be gathered here tonight. Actually, failure is responsible for bringing us together. Last year, I applied for and did not get a grant to fund a class project, one in which students would have a chance to explore communities and connections outside the realm of their experience, then come back and write about it. Luckily, the grant application process brought me into contact with this generous creative space, the Kelly Writers House, and the can-do enthusiasm of its staff and director, Jessica Lowenthal, matched by support from Julia Block and the Creative Writing Program, the Netter Center at Penn, and the time and attention generously donated by our community contacts. The project happened anyway. Each of my 15 students, who are all here tonight, paired with a person or group from the Philadelphia fiber and folk arts worlds. Artists and artisans and hobbyists and enthusiasts, students visited homes and studios and bars and coffee shops, spending time with their contacts and aiming to understand what binds them to their work. That's more than 30 creative people who've played a role in tonight's event. I'm proud to present a sampling of them and their work. One piece, which you can see on the side wall here, is called Temporary. It's by street artist Nicole Nikolic, and it was inspired by a comment that her student partner, Max Abram, made when they joined up for an installation day. You may see it again after tonight somewhere in the neighborhood. I wish we had time to hear every essay that resulted. We definitely don't. Instead, we've highlighted the work of 9 community contacts, and we're going to hear excerpts from 5 of the students. All 15 student essays will be uploaded to the Creative Writing Department website at the end of the semester, in print or in audio. Tonight's event will be recorded as well, and it will be available through the Kelly Writers House archive. Failure is the mother of invention. That's what artists grapple with and what we try to embrace in our writing workshop, to see that invention only comes from letting yourself jump into possibility and then recalibrate and refine the parts that don't land. First drafts are reliably bad, and you can't get anywhere without them. We will move this night along at a rapid clip, but not before I ask Caroline Scown to come up here and show the thank you broadsheet that she and Johnathan Chen, members of the class, go ahead, flip it around, made at our Penn's Common Press with the help of studio manager Mary Tassilo. So that's for each of our community contacts and our students. So thanks, Caroline and Johnathan. Now we're going to begin with a multimedia performance piece, which was conceived and directed by Shelby Donnelly.
everyone. Thanks for being here. My name's Shelby Donnelly. This is the first time I'm seeing this piece performed live, so I'm really excited. Thanks for witnessing it. I want to give a special thanks to Lisa and Becca. Where's Becca? Becca, hi. It's really extraordinary to be here with all these amazing artists and have the opportunity to be at Kelly Writer's house. This is such a perfect venue. So I want to give a special thanks to Jessica Shikatano for her poem that was projected. Woo! And Ruby Imanze, who I've known she was my first friend in Philadelphia, and she's been amazing in my artistic career and always joins in on these ventures with me. And then Ava Hessinger, who is brilliantly standing here in this garment. Ava and I teach together at Lincoln University. So I just usually pull my friends in to do these performances. Usually I perform in them, but this is the first time I got to just sit back and direct. So I'll just tell you a little bit about my background. I have my MFA in fibers, and I've recently started making garments, and so all the garments I've made that the performers are wearing, and my company is called Wear to Wall, and the idea is that they're custom garments, they're one-of-a-kind originals, and the performances are kind of just extensions of the garment, like the story of the garment. And the way the performances occurred to me are just very quickly. Like, I was thinking about the hand gestures when you're a kid, when you like pile your hands like this. Do you guys remember that? And I just was thinking about that gesture, and I was like, oh, I'll just have the women in the performance create a pile. And I think it was it's just very simple like that. But then, as you can see with the garments, and then, women actually piling their bodies, it takes on different meanings. And then the words that Jessica wrote, we've been interested in pairing her words with my work. It's kind of a newer experimentation. So I don't know. There's a lot I could say. I'd rather, if anybody has questions, I'd be happy to answer. But other than that, I don't want to take up more time. So. Yeah, sure. Thank you, and thank you.
Thank you. I need a student volunteer or two to move the podium back. Student. Okay. So our next experience is going to be a reading by student Sonali Deliwala, who was paired with the artist Betty Leecraft, who will follow her. Sonali's just going to read a section of the piece that she wrote.
Hi, my name is Sonali, and I'm going to be reading an excerpt from a piece called A Common Thread. When I worked as a waitress at the local Indian Garden restaurant, I was told to serve iced water to the non-Indian customers and reserve non-iced water for the Indians. The owner instructed me to treat the Desi families to gulab jamuns and serve mango pudding to everyone else. Warmth and amusement light up my parents' faces when our Indian friends show up to gatherings at typical Indian Standard Time, or at least 2 hours late. An openness emanates from their presence, gradually changing our behavior. It's the lessened creasing in my mom's forehead, the slight settling of her shoulders, her uncontrollable giggling mingling together with the other aunties, or Dad's deep, bottomless laughter when his eyes scrunch up, the wide-eyed, silly faces he makes at my sister and I. I recognized early on that my family and I have certain expectations for Indians. We draw distinctions, unintentionally and subconsciously, between people who are like us and people who are not. With the former, we make brown jokes unabashed, smile deeper and longer, and greet people in our language. Being with other Indians makes us feel warmer, closer, and more anchored. But examined in another vein, my family's preferences could be described differently and carry a negative undertone. We harbor different expectations for different people, depending on their race and ethnicity, in this case towards Indians and non-Indians. I've wondered if the harsh truth of our behavior is that we are practicing a cultural form of racism. Over the past few years, I've begun to experience a twinge of discomfort whenever I or my family make that immediate connection with our fellow Daisies. Does our selectivity border on exclusivity? Fabric and mixed media artist Betty Leecraft has challenged me to extend more curiosity toward others and find a common thread across cultural spheres. I first spoke with Miss Leecraft over the phone a week before we met in person. She began to tell me about her work, why she worked in the places she did, and the recognition she's achieved. About 20 minutes into the conversation, she mentioned something along the lines of, "And as a woman of color yourself, I'm sure you know what I mean." I blinked and straightened abruptly. Her words involved me somehow in her story. She had grouped me with herself. Miss Leecraft made me part of her conversation. She asked about my roots in India, and we spent at least 15 minutes talking about my family's religion. My face lit up and my voice warmed the same way my parents did, and this time the connection felt more intense. Miss Leecraft, about a week later, we met in person at the Community Education Center on Lancaster Avenue. Miss Leecraft spread out a banner made in an art class she'd taught in the 1990s at the Girard Medical Center Torre de la Raza for the Latino Substance Abuse Program. She recalled her first class, where she'd brought a salsa music CD, and, upon finding out that the men were Puerto Rican, she researched Puerto Rican deities that they could pattern onto their art. They appreciated that, she remembered. She paused on a paragraph of text encased in a sheet protector, entitled Therapist's Observations. Miss Leecraft explained to me that it was a report on her class at the substance abuse program, and it was particularly important to her because it documented her impact. After a few months of her workshop with them, the medical center's therapist noted that Miss Leecraft's sensitivity to the participants' experience and her high degree of cultural awareness served to ease participants' anxiety and increase group cohesion, which was ultimately the first concrete record of recovery for many participants. I was struck by how her cultural awareness, combined with her passion for teaching art, was able to change the course of their rehabilitation. I left our first meeting wondering if perhaps the exchange and understanding of another's culture is what brings meaning to one's own. Miss Leecraft and I met again 2 weeks later at the International House on Chestnut Street. She talked about how she makes it her business to find a detail that can connect her to another individual. Miss Leecraft recalled an earlier experience. When I got into my Uber and I heard this man's African accent, I asked him where he was from, and he said Nigeria. I asked him, "Are you Yoruba? Igbo?" The surprised driver exclaimed, "How do you know about all of that?" Miss Leecraft looked at me, her light eyes beaming more intensely, and turned in her chair to fully face me. "It is my job to know because I live here in America. It's my duty to know." Ms. Leecraft only knows that her maternal grandfather originated from Buxton, Guyana, and the paternal side of her family lived in America. She doesn't know the specifics of her roots. "I don't know my ethnicity," Ms. Leecraft said, so she tries to find it through others. Inspired by her unabated openness and boundless interest in culture, I feel compelled to share Ms. Leecraft's passion for uncovering the world. I want my culture to be a bridge, not a wall.
I will be reading because I have 5 minutes, and that's not something I really know how to do well. And people who know me understand that. And hopefully there is not going to be a problem with the device. So I'll just say, good evening. Good evening. Okay, I was hoping someone would say something back, because then I would say, oh, okay, well, this is a call and response person here. So if I put out the call, you give me the response. So thank you for me not having to give instructions. Sonali mentioned my grandfather from Guyana, and this is a photo of him from about 1936. And I tend to introduce myself to classes, which as of Monday and my birthday, I consider myself officially semi-retired as a teaching artist. But I try to get students' interest by way of my ancestors, because we all have them, and it's something that is a common thread. This is the person who was responsible for my cultural curiosity. But the piece that I am going to show you is really celebrating the matrilineal line, and it's called Matrilineal Praise Song, which I'll just get it over here, and after I'm done with the device, then I will show that. I'm going to read my artist statement. Can everyone hear me? You know, I'm not a performer, so I'm not conscious of the mic all the time. As a shapeshifter of textiles, my art making blurs the lines between quilts, wall hangings, wearable art, sculpture, and installation. My artistic curiosity is ignited by experimentation. Being informed by the artistic cultural traditions of Africa, the African diaspora, and inspired by cultural contributions of African Americans, particularly jazz music, I address themes of heritage, nature, cultural symbolism, ritual, and the human condition. My practice blends multiple techniques and processes, including hand and machine stitching, quilting, surface design, embellishment, wet felt making, non-traditional materials, and currently digital printing. As a child, my maternal grandmother taught me to sew. An interest in world culture was nurtured by my Guyanese grandfather. Working with fabric is an artistic gift from female ancestors who engaged in these practices before me. When I create, I am actively remembering, thanking, and honoring the memory of these ancestors for gifts which have enabled me to develop a strong sense of artistic self-determination. Art making allows me freedom of improvisational and intuitive expression to produce work that validates my existence as a creative human being on this planet. My artistic efforts and endeavors are dedicated to the loving memory of Sadie Artist Wills, who placed the first needle and thread in my hands. And I might also say that at her house is where I discovered scissors as a child. So the fact that this picture still remains is one of those miracles. I told my grandmother when she said wherever she would hide the scissors, I would find them and start whacking on pictures. So I said I was trying to tell you something then. And scissors have been a part of my existence, you know, since childhood, because my creating started with the grandmother who I'll show you right now. So I'm going to have Sonali stand at an angle where everyone can see. Can you see?
And hold it up as high as you can.
Okay. All right, this is my maternal grandmother, Sadie Artist Wills, and this is probably the age that she was when she married my grandfather. Over here is my mother when she was graduating from St. Augustine College in Raleigh, North Carolina, where she met my dad. So this is him in his uniform from World War II. And on the other side is a great aunt Laura, who I was told was a midwife, and she was a quilter, who, when she had her quilting bees, I don't want your arms to get tired. When she had her quilting bees, my mother's job was to separate the colors of cloth for the women. And one phrase that I remember my mother saying she heard my aunt say in the quilting bee was, "Send that red down the middle." And I said, well, what did she mean? Down the middle of a quilt block? Down the middle of what? She really didn't know. But I sent red down the middle in a piece that I did in 2017 for a Philadelphia Symbol project at the Perlman Building at the Philadelphia Museum of Art, and I was unconscious of the fact that I did that. So I realized all these decades and generations later, I sent red down the middle. So the colors that are in this piece are representative of colors that were favorites of my grandmother's, which is why I wore what I wore tonight, because it honors her memory. And I really do believe that all of them, and on my father's side too, because this is called Matrilineal Praise Song, and there is another piece, but I only have 5 minutes. So I wanted you to see it. There are letters from, I think, the Eisenhower administration and the Roosevelt administration, and one of the governors of North Carolina. I don't know what she wrote to them, but they wrote her back on official stationery, which I thought was pretty amazing. So I will cut it off here because there's so much more that I could say, but I'm being very conscious of others behind me, and I don't want Lise to start doing her eyes. But I'd like to thank all who have come, and I'd like to also thank those people in the audience I know that I can refer safely as saying that we are sisters of the cloth, and including a former employee of the Fabric Workshop, Liz McElvain, with whom we had shared a lot of moments when I was there from 1980 to 86. That's a whole other evening of things to talk about. So I'm glad you've met my folks, at least some of them. You've met my granddad, and you've met my dad. The only thing I didn't bring, which you would have loved, was my baby picture before I learned to walk, because it's probably the only cute picture of me as a child, because when I show it to kids, I said, yes, the person standing before you actually used to be a really cute little brown baby. So maybe another time. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next up is Johnathan Chen, who was paired with Ash Lemus over there. Ash brought that beautiful book of fabric samples from the Fabric Workshop. And Johnathan, come on up and read your piece.
Hi everyone, I'm Johnathan. Nice to meet all of you. I met Ash in the middle of a really busy semester, and it got me thinking a lot about connection and community. So I wanted to read this piece about my experience of meeting her. I don't like eye contact. Well, that's only somewhat true. I like looking at eyes, but I don't like it when they look back. I know it's nothing personal because I keep pulling out my camera when soft light touches someone's face, or noticing the way furrowed eyebrows mean different things depending on how your cheeks look, or enjoying the way a nose attempts to break symmetry. They're all tiny universes to explore. So yes, I like faces, glad I got that out of the way, but eye contact is different. Those infinite holes, opaque and transparent, forming a connection immediate and vulnerable, one that is too intimate and deep all the same. Ash had big eyes, the large kind that seems to be two colors at the same time. We met after a few email exchanges originating from the contact hyperlink on her About page. Next to it adorned the sentence, Ash Lemes Castellana is a printmaker and multimedia artist residing in Philadelphia. Her artwork was beautiful, and through internet magic and simple scheduling, I found myself rereading that same description outside her studio door. This was amateur artist, photographer me, meeting real artist, screen and printer Ash. I wanted to make a good impression and connect, whatever that means. At 5:30 p.m., she opened the door. Hello. A small, perfunctory handshake accompanied by just long enough eye contact followed. In that moment, I realized 30% more photons must reach her retina than mine, and that's not just because I'm Asian. Welcome to the FWH. We were on the 7th floor of the Fabric Workshop and Museum, the crossover of an impossibly long hospital hallway and neat hippie studio. The small gift shop entrance downstairs, solo elevator ride up, and white-walled waiting room outside now felt like improper facades of this endless space of creation, like the infinity hallway produced when two mirrors are caught staring at one another. This was Ash's chosen home. If I hadn't reached out to her, The unassuming entrance in front would be another one of the hundreds I passed by every day, without a thought spared to what perspectives might lie inside. Let me quickly take you around before we close at 6. Ash's crash course began as we moved from topic to topic with ease. To screen print, one must sketch, draw, design, print, mask, mix, ink, squeegee, rinse, then repeat. It felt familiar. Ash read my mind. This is almost exactly like analog film photography, minus the paint portion. You create a negative to expose the final image, and at the end of the process, I found 1 foot, 5 feet, even 20 feet long fabric masterpieces adorning her long infinity hallway. I thought to myself, each and every one of these pieces definitely screamed when stuffed onto my iPhone screen. An image is not enough to communicate the work. In my backpack, my laptop and camera sat still, reminding me that no matter how clear my screen is, connection is analog. 6 p.m. arrived, and I realized that in Ash's exposition, I learned more about her infinity hallway studio than Ash herself. She read my mind. Do you want to go grab coffee? I don't like coffee, but I love grabbing it. A while later, we found ourselves in the middle of a quaint coffee shop, the artsy kind with curated empty space and far too few chairs. Iced tea in hand, I asked, do you want to walk outside instead? Part of this was practical. Our stuffy noses would run less. And part of this was personal. No need for eye contact this way. We trudged up Walnut Street, the sky above opening itself to the kind of scene usually only extant on Google Images. It was one of the first warm winter days of the season, one that felt sweet and full. Ash's tissue paper roll was now stuffed safely in her backpack, giving us a reprieve to chat. We ran through the usual gamut of topics. She was raised in Miami as a first-generation immigrant from Cuba, worked as both artist and art educator, and owns a dog with her husband. I reflected with my own mirror. I was Texas-born but Shanghai-raised, electrical engineer or business student but usually photographer, and no dog, unfortunately. The conversation did not feel dissimilar to the tour Ash had given me just minutes prior. Expositional in nature, necessarily contextual. Small talk, shooting the breeze, just chatting. These were all ways of saying the same thing. Planned connection. I abandoned this strategy when I realized the quality of a question will determine the quality of an answer. How did you decide to become an artist? I never really considered that as a career possibility, but whenever I take my camera out, life seems to notice itself. We were interrupted by 7-year-old street performers surrounding us outside a 7-Eleven. When their performance concluded, I smiled at the applause they received and thought that art comes in so many forms. Ash replied, I sort of fell into screen printing in college, but I was always interested in art. You're always trying to, see something. I liked the sound of what she was hinting at. That art is about creating and doing, sure, but also that at its core, art is about noticing, a perspective. Art is how you see. We stopped on an intersection. On the ground, I noticed the cracks on the sidewalk, how they zigzagged down cement, not unlike raindrops finding their way down window panes. It took me a second to realize our conversation had paused, and I looked over to see Ash looking down too at something as well, her green irises outlining halos of past thought. This act of noticing, of seeing, of actually looking, something about that felt like art to me. We arrived at a bench on the Schuylkill River Trail. I pointed upwards and said, that cloud over there looks like a dinosaur, too curious for its own good. Ash responded, which cloud? And what does a dinosaur too curious for its own good even look like? I answered, I don't know, kind of like that cloud, pointing again. Our conversation had reached that magical threshold of carrying itself, of light-hearted souls interweaving and creating a picture that looks something like what I imagined Van Gogh felt when he painted The Starry Night. I asked her what marriage looks like, what a good conversation looks like, what our relationship with our parents looks like. I wondered why I always used the phrase looks like when describing thought. Why not any other sense? What if the question were, what does your relationship with your parent smell like? Mine is musky and filled with cedar, a sense of homeliness and comfort, maybe a log burning in the corner. Ash quietly mentioned she hadn't spoken to her father in a large part of a long while, so I imagined hers smelt of burnt forests longing for new trees. The sun soon faded behind the earth, and we noticed thunderstorms in the distance lighting up clouds from within. It was time to conclude our 2-player epic, a game whose goal is to make the opposing stranger less strange. Towards the end, Ash remarks, it's interesting getting to know you, and this feeling of getting to know someone. Like I didn't think we had any awkward pauses or anything, and it felt so natural. She avoided my eyes, gazing instead at the approaching electric clouds. Conversation is so terrifyingly mystical. How human it is to crave communion, and how normal it is in everyday life to not achieve it. Ash and I were not on an exposition guide or fact-finding. There was no infinity hallway tour I could give her to properly understand me. In fact, it wasn't until we moved on from that exposition that I felt a sense of knowing her, of knowing her eyes, of knowing what things looked like to Ash. Before we left, That last moment of eye contact we made with one another felt familiar, more comforting. Maybe it was the silence that preceded it, characterizing connection as a delicacy instead of a radical vulnerability. There we were, Ash and me, two artists' eyes peering through each other, two stuffy noses sniffing each other's past, two people realizing they had to look out in order to look in. Thank you.
You're up, Johnathan. JaHyun Young is going to read, and then she'll be followed by her community contact, Ashaki Denise Jones.
Where did she go? Right. This is an excerpt with the beginning and the end cut, but basically I'm talking about my experience at Ashaki's art exhibition. Like a soggy cat looking for warm milk, I showed up sodden-spirited to Ashaki Denise Foy Jones' art exhibition. As I walked into a homey dining room, bustling conversation and the aroma of piquant herbs greeted me before the Pendle Hill staff member did. I acquainted myself with a heaping plate of chocolate chip cookies and a warm cup of coffee before I looked around to face my fellow human cohort. I further encouraged myself with a quick mantra, I love people, and fell into conversation with a beautiful and well-mannered young lady named Shishina. Gratefully, she reaffirmed my mantra. Proverbs 31:13, verses 13 to 26. She selects wool and flax and works with eager hands. She sets about her work vigorously. Her arms are strong for her tasks. In her hand she holds the distaff and grasps the spindle with her fingers. She opens her arms to the poor and extends her hands to the needy. She makes linen garments and sells them, and supplies the merchants with sashes. She is clothed with strength and dignity. She can laugh at the days to come. She speaks with wisdom, and faithful instruction is on her tongue. Ashaki immediately recognized me, one of the few guests who wasn't a relative or friend, not to mention the one Asian amidst the rich dark tones of African heritage. Glasses sat atop her nose, and a colorful patchwork quilt blanketed her shoulders. I could easily see her sitting at a rocking chair reading to children, and was not surprised to later learn that she was a former school teacher. She gathered me in a welcoming embrace. It didn't feel like a hug given on a first meeting, but rather one warm with compassion, like the kind given to a child of a close church friend with God's blessing wished upon you. I already felt like part of her community. My first impression of Ashaki had been over our phone conversation the previous day. I had sensed a motherly vibe as she fretted about my transportation to Pendle Hill, offering to find a friend heading from the same direction. I was touched how curious she was about me. We only talked briefly, but immediately bonded over our qualms regarding institutionalized religion. Raised by a Baptist mother and a Catholic father, she had gone to Catholic school, period. Incredibly, she had already started questioning her faith in 3rd grade, but it wasn't until college that she could take her belief in God and begin giving it eclectic form. Her spirituality is primarily influenced by, but not limited to, Catholicism, Baptism, Buddhism, African spiritual traditions, and religious science. Unconvinced by the dogma of having to do things a certain way, she believes that God speaks to us if we speak God, leading her to embrace different religions as equal paths to God. The crowd that came to support Ashaki settled down and listened enthusiastically to her as she exclaimed her art exhibition was like a birthday party. Tears welled up as she thanked her audience as well as her mother and grandmother. I noticed how her dreads hung over one shoulder, gracefully framing her face with a symbol of what I interpret as rootedness, both in ancestry and in religious convictions. Genesis chapter 2, verse 7. And the Lord God formed man of the dust of the ground, and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living soul. Just as religion is an important part of Ashaki's upbringing, art wove itself into her spiritual practice. Hailing from 5 generations of quilters, she learned to sew from her mother, Dorothy Foy Jones, an owner of a Philadelphia dressmaking business. Up on the walls of the Tree Room's gallery were the diverse quilted and mixed media creations birthed by Ashaki. Earth-toned patterned fabrics, bright turmeric and pacifying indigos, studs of cowrie shells interspersed among lace, wood, dried sponges, and metals. It was a genetic crossing over of earth-sourced materials infused with the spirit of its mother. There is intentionality behind each material, copper to signify healing, or the lace embodying the feminine spirit. Whereas many parents seem to choose favorites among their children, Ashaki was unable to choose a favorite piece when asked. They were all equally dear and unique manifestations of her. Her own being was projected into this body of work, which she describes as exposing her. She even goes to sleep with her quilt work by her bedside. It's one of the things she anchors her day on. Just as God breathed life into Ashaki, she molds and guides her artwork like a parent would a child. Impregnated by a spiritual call, she then pours her faith into the gathered multifarious materials and allows the piece to work itself into life. Her goal is neither technical competence nor academic artistry, but rather to bear organic, life-giving fruit that challenges the conventional view of an artist.
That's me. Surprise. Great to be here. Thank you so much. And thank you, Lisa, for organizing this, and also the students. You guys work very hard. I am a former teacher, and you guys have stepped into the challenge, and I'm very impressed. So before I show this, I just want to talk a little bit about me, just quickly. I'm quite loquacious, but sometimes I do get a little nervous, so I do have something here to read. My skills were honed alongside my mother in a dressmaking business. What's very interesting is that the business was at 45th and Walnut. So, and we lived at 44th and Walnut. So this campus was kind of like my playground, my hangout area. My first job, besides my mother's business, was at Baskin Robbins. And before there was security, we used to hang out here. So I kind of know parts of this campus, and it was great. So, people ask me, how long have I been sewing? I don't remember not sewing. With a mother who was a dressmaker, with clientele, actually from a lot of people from the University of Penn, and also from Drexel University. It's just always been a part of who I am. I also had this love of art. I went to Fleischer's when I was younger. Mill Creek, there was an art program there. And although I wasn't an art star, I didn't draw, I just always had this love for art. I would go to the art museum. One of my mother's clients would drag me there on Saturdays, and I hated it, but I loved it. For me, quilting it's a spiritual practice. It's how I connect with people, how I connect with passions that I have. It's also a way to teach. As an educator, I'm always in the process of teaching. So I just want to talk a little bit about the quilt now, if you will. And it's interesting that Lorraine Carey is here because this quilt, this is called Free and Choose to Remain So. And this particular, can you hear me? You don't necessarily, okay. This quilt depicts Oni Judd. And I'll mention Lorraine here, if you don't know her. She's a wonderful person to know, writer and so many other things. But she did a film, and the film documents Oni and 9 other people who were enslaved by George Washington. And it is actually at 6th and Market, and it runs on rotation right before the Liberty House. But there was a call to do quilts depicting the 9 people that George Washington enslaved. The initial exhibit was at the Constitution Center back in 2011. And I decided to do Oni Judd. So I'll tell you something about some of the symbols. Of course, she was enslaved by George Washington. So the flag kind of, the contradiction of him being the first president of this wonderful nation who sought freedom. but yet he still enslaved people. The other interesting thing about George Washington is that in the state of Pennsylvania at the time, if you were enslaved and you were here in this country, and you were here in the state for 6 months, you automatically got your freedom. What George would do is that when it got close to the 6-month time, he would take the people that he managed, I like to say, out of the state, sometimes to Mount Vernon, sometimes to New Jersey, but anything to kind of start the clock, if you will. Oni is looking out the window because she decided to escape while she was watching George and Martha prepare to go to Mount Vernon. And she actually was enslaved initially through Martha, who was married to a man named Custis. My facts correct? I know she's researching. So she heard Martha, in this conversation said that she was going to gift Oni to Martha's granddaughter. And I guess Oni's like, no, it's not going to happen. So anyway, as she was watching them, she was preparing to leave. Here is a advertisement for a capture. It was in the Pennsylvania Gazette, May 23rd, 1776. It says, "Scanded from the president's house to the United States, a mulatto girl. She was fine, black bushy hair, delicately formed, and well dressed." And I wanted to show Oni in a very, not contemporary, but lost for words. But oftentimes you see people who are enslaved in swaddling clothes. I wanted to show that, we were concerned about how we dress. Finely dressed. He mentioned that, but also wanted to show that we did take honor and care in terms of how we dress. As I mentioned, my mother's a dressmaker, so is Oni. So I wanted to show that this ribbon in her hair is actually, this bow in her hair is actually a zipper. Also in Philadelphia. Philadelphia was the center at one time of, it was the industrial center for clothing manufacturing. So it's also to recognize those women. This piece around her neck is a juju bag. And what happened during the Haitian Revolution, all over the enslaved world, people who captured African people or escaped people were very concerned. So this is her juju. She remained free. The reason why I called it Free and Choose to Remain So is because she escaped to New Hampshire, and George Washington sent for her several times. He says, "Look, when I die, I'll put it in my will. You'll be free." And she's like, I'm free already, and I choose to remain so. However, she was always looking out the window, even when she was in New Hampshire. She still had that over her. The colors, talking about spirituality, this is the color of Oshun. Oshun is a African deity, specifically from the Yoruba. And Oshun represents femininity. And I wanted to show that femininity. And then you have blue, which is Yemenya. And Yemenya was very clever, very much a planner. So I wanted to incorporate that. My mother, as I mentioned, was a dressmaker. My mother passed in 2005, and since she passed, I always included something that belonged to her. So this is a piece of fabric that she used to wear. Also, I got some fabric from Ghana when I went, and that's pretty much it. So this is Free and Choose to Remain So, and it's one of my pieces. One last thing I just want to say, in terms of my spiritual practice, I was a teacher, but just kind of wanted to do something else, move on. And that was about 12 years or so ago. I had an opportunity at Pencil Hill to do a solo show, which was still up. And the curator talked to me about, what was the name going to be. I'm like, well, I'm not sure. I'm just trying to do the work. But then I thought about how I even got to Pencil Hill, and even how I got to be standing here in front of you. Whenever I really did listen to that still small voice, God, the universe, whatever you want to call it, it's always led me to some really wonderful things. So the name of the exhibit is Answering the Call, and that's pretty much my mantra throughout my life. So, thank you.
So our next situation is not exactly a performance piece, but Caroline, can you help, and Maria, can you help put some chairs up for us?